Welcome to Tech Startups Creating Equity and Empowerment. Thank you for coming to the session. I'm Sally Beatty from Korn Ferry. We're a global executive search and leadership advisory firm. And before we get into some questions and our compelling and dynamic conversation that we're going to have, just wanted to have the panelists briefly introduce yourselves and share what company you're from.
My name is Aya Bader. I'm the founder and CEO of Little Bits. We make electronic building blocks to help kids learn STEM and STEAM and get confident using technology.
That's awesome. That's my thing on. Hello. Hey everybody. It's pretty, you can hear me even if it's not on. I'm Zev Eigen. I'm the founder and chief science officer of Syndio. Syndio Solutions helps companies close the gender pay gap and keep it closed with data and data science.
Cool. I'm Sean. I'm the founder and CEO of FlockJ. We're an online boot camp for tech sales, and we create pathways into tech for people from non-traditional and underrepresented backgrounds.
My name is Morgan Mercer. I'm the founder and CEO of Vantage Point. We're an immersive training platform leveraging virtual reality, AI, natural language processing to provide training around areas that matter, such as anti-sexual harassment training, unconscious bias training, etc.
I'm Lisa Ski-Tatum. I'm founder and CEO of Landit. We are the market leader in personalized career pathing. So we put you at the center and then surround you with all the tools you need to achieve success on your own terms.
Well, thank you. So equity and empowerment isn't always about gender equality and getting women in the right roles, but it is a major component of it. So I want to start off with a couple interesting facts that we've been talking about recently at Korn Ferry. So based on our research, men are hired based on performance. Women are, or on potential. Women are hired based on performance. Only 5% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. And women hold 15% of board seats globally. Women are paid 23% less on a global scale, and we're 47% of the workforce. But the good news is that UK introduced mandatory pay equity laws and reporting. Saudi Arabia made it legal for women to drive. El Salvador passed a law to protect women from violence at work. And both here in the States, Adobe committed to pay equity globally, and Starbucks has committed to 100% pay equity. So we have lots of examples of people moving in the right direction and doing innovative things to bridge the gaps. So what I wanted to start off by talking about was, what do we see that's working and what's not working?
So I'll start. So what's not working is the status quo. And what we find in the workforce is the old model of one size fits all doesn't work. So we are in the new world order of personalization. You have to meet people where they are. And at the end of the day, it's about access, right? So certainly 47% of the workforce, we're motivated, we have the track record, we have the skills, but often we don't know where to start, we don't know what we don't know, and even if we did, we don't have the access. So it's about unlocking human potential by giving people a level playing field and then moving them forward one step at a time.
And even just to take that one step further, I completely agree with that. What we find isn't working is explaining things to people when they might not necessarily even understand what that feeling feels like. So, for an example, it's really hard to explain what it feels like to feel uncomfortable or to feel like the elephant in the room. But if you can actually create that feeling for somebody and show people what that feeling feels like, they'll be more cognizant of it and more aware of it. And so for underrepresented groups, a lot of times it comes down to explaining a feeling that somebody might not be on the receiving end of.
I think too that, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that is really important, so we think a lot about sort of education and access and post-placement support. A lot of what happens is after you do create that outcome where you actually do create that opportunity, you're thrust in a new environment where the language and sort of the things that you had mentioned aren't readily available. And so speaking in ways that you can identify with, seeing people who are examples of success you can emulate and aspire to is part of the solution, is also part of the problem. That's something we're thinking a lot about in providing post-hire support for people.
I actually think that's a great point because so many people focus on intake.
Yeah.
And great organizations will always find great people. The problem is, do they thrive when they get there?
Exactly.
Yeah, and we're all about thriving once they get there. So no one likes to work at a place where they feel like they're paid inequitably. If you do all these engagement surveys and you say, oh, I love the 401k, I love the water cooler, I love the pool table, and then you find out tomorrow that men are paid more for the exact same job you have, it's like your mindset switches and you're like, burn it down. No one wants to stay at a place like that. And so for me and at Syndio, our mission is we see the status quo as being really inefficient, really bad. And even companies that are well-intentioned, like Adobe or other companies, we work with Adobe, we work with lots of companies who are well-intentioned, and they were struggling with the status quo because using a labor economist or a law firm without technology to help you get pay equity right. Pay equity is a solvable series of math equations, and you have to be able to do it right, and you have to be able to have access, democratize access to complex analytics. That's all we did. The technology piece was just right there, and we just built it in. The same way, like if you said, hey, should we use like an old typewriter or should we use a computer now? And you're like, oh, work sucks, so if you have to use old typewriters, it's like, hey, we have computers. That's literally all we did. And like, when you hear all these statistics, oh, it's going to take 200 years to solve this problem, Maria, our CEO, and and everyone else at Syndio are like, nope, it should be solvable now with technology. That's exactly why we built what we did.
So this is an interesting panel because different pieces are working on different pieces of the same problem. We work much earlier in the process. So the thing that I find not working is when we're starting to solve the problem. There have been hundreds of millions of dollars invested in solving the problem at the university level and at the career level. The problem is by that time, the pool is already small. The pool, particularly we focus on STEM and STEAM, so science, technology, engineering, and math, and the pool of diverse candidates and women in particular is small when you're trying to hire. And the problem starts occurring at age 10. Really at age 10 is where you see the biggest drop off in girls' interest in STEM. They're very interested. At 5 years old, they feel super confident. At 6, their confidence starts dropping. At age 9, they're starting to really peel off their interest. And it's a collection of external factors and internal factors that are driving this. And so we focus a lot on age 10, and we have to start there. But then the goal is to equip them with mentorship and give them tools so that it can sustain them throughout their career when they are encountering sexism or microaggressions or different things, they're able to handle it. So I think that by starting early but also investing in a foundation and tackling the different pieces of the problem, then there could be a lot better chance of success because right now it's been about 25 years and the statistics have not changed. In fact, they've gotten worse. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what's driving adoption? Is it, whether it's K-12, post-secondary, professional learning, is it a hard sell to convince people, or is it we need to do this, we understand the problem? Is it tied to an economic reason? Is it a regulatory reason? What's driving some of the usage and interest in your business?
Well, I'll start with the example that I was just giving now at age 10, for example. It's a complex problem when if you have a 10-year-old girl or you're teaching one in school, what they're exhibiting is just, I'm not interested in robotics, I'm not interested in electronics, I don't want to learn how to code, and you can't really force them, you can't shove it down their throat. So what we did, in fact, last week we launched a program called Snap the Gap. It's a nonprofit program that aims to donate a STEM starter pack to every 10-year-old girl in America. Mm-hmm. And the pack contains a hands-on learning component, a peer mentorship online component where they can meet other like-minded girls, and then a mentorship component by an adult in STEM. So if you're able to tackle the community aspect through the peer community of girls their age, mentorship by an adult who they aspire to be like, and then a set of physical hands-on learning tools, then what we found is that you can really start to change that ratio. So we're starting in California with 15,000 girls in California this year, and that's a program funded by Disney, and then the goal is to start scaling it in California and then take on new states every year so we can take it national and hopefully global.
That's very cool. I can speak a bit to some of the professional education side. So we train and certify high-quality sales representatives, and the beauty of sales is it's very aligned in terms of just effectiveness of your job. And so the conversations we have, so 80% of our classes are Black, Latinx, or female, and we invest a lot of time in training and messaging to to reach people where they are. But in terms of actually what's driving adoption, it turns out that non-routine and cognitive diversity in the workplace, particularly for functions like sales, is accretive just financially for a team. Like sales teams do better when you have diverse teams, because customers are becoming more and more diverse. And so as you build more and more diverse sales teams, it actually is accretive to the business. So those conversations are both economic and sort of mission oriented, and that's what's lining up well in our conversations.
I think that's what we're seeing, because it's an ROI case,
Yeah.
and what gets measured gets done. And there's not a Fortune 50 customer of ours or a nonprofit that doesn't have leveraging the full measure and talent of their workforce top of mind. But we also have the individual, because who doesn't want to succeed on their own terms? So we don't buy the whole supply issue, demand issue. We think it's a market failure, which is why I geek out on technology, because it's the way that you can solve it in a turnkey way for your customers in a way that they can measure, but also it's about unlocking human potential, moving them forward globally. So we don't have any friction in that regard.
I think too, like the other panelists are saying, I think it is about, we see it as three kind of key components of what get folks onto the pay equity train. Some are definitely risk averse, like they're afraid of legal risk and the cost, but I also think there's a lot of value here too, like some of the other panelists were mentioning, like there's an HR benefit of having people who are paid equitably. You can't recruit or hire people if they're not paid equitably. So especially in tech, we do a lot of work in tech because of the prevalence of suits against Google and other tech companies. And we have some smaller tech clients who say, look, we can't hire or recruit talented female engineers if we don't showcase the fact that we're paying people equitably at this company. So not just the fear of risk, but also the positive value of being able to attract top talent. So yes, the pool is definitely small, but like you want to get the best talent, and that's the best way to do it. And then there's also a PR benefit. Like the avoidance of the negative PR, of course, is like the bad side. But for companies like Adobe and other companies that get it right and get ahead of the curve, there's a real value for them. So we are trying to like champion to the businesses, this idea of selling to a business something that's also socially good and beneficial, and the fact that like, yes, improving diversity is also improving your bottom line. Yes, doing pay equity is also something that's going to be good for your bottom line business profitability, has been sort of a theme that I think growing in the HR tech space, and it's a really good theme. I think it's great.
I mean, we've seen adoption on both sides. So on one side, the benefit of leveraging emerging technology is that you have increased analytics, right? You have the ability to actually understand all of these different trends and the ways that markets are moving, the ways that people are thinking about different things. And so that's one use case that's been really compelling, right? But then on the other side, another use case that we've seen that's been incredibly compelling has been the fact that people recognize that there is this massive opportunity to change the ways that we've historically thought about education and learning, right? And not necessarily just using it as a direct swap out, but even using it as an adjunct, because things like in-person training can be incredibly beneficial, but it's really difficult to scale that. So are there ways where you can leverage technology, plug and play, identify different core areas of your populations that could then use that in-person training while you're still being able to create that really highly valuable experiential form of training at scale? And so I think it's really just looking at both sides. One is being able to enhance what you're existingly doing, and then the other is having the analytics and the data points to have a better understanding of what the picture looks like.
And along the line of scale, I mean, how has technology enabled, with artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, et cetera, or, where has technology not, been our friend in being able to build these platforms to do the work that you're doing?
Well, technology is the enabler, and there's no way we could do what we do without it. So we know that the services we provide are reserved typically for the C-suite, but imagine knitting that all together and giving it to anyone, regardless of their location or tenure or function, et cetera. So technology allows you to do that, but you can't forget the human, right? You need some human in this human capital management. But if you think about it, we're never going back to the company being responsible for you. You are. We're in the era of self-service careers. So you have to use technology in order to do that. I don't see any other way. I mean, the companies we have, they have plenty of money. What they don't have is the ability to touch more lives.
One of the cool things we're seeing in terms of just scaling training is that you can actually build accountable community online using technology. That video quality and sort of things like Zoom and Slack exist where the fidelity of that interaction is so good now that we have 25-year-olds and 50-year-olds in Rogers, Arkansas, and Detroit finding time to train each other in sales online and offline. And the magic happens when they both relocate for their jobs and meet each other in real life in their city. And so those are the kinds of moments that technology is enabling, where we're able to reach people in places we've never been able to reach them at a fidelity and quality that preserves the humanity of those interactions.
One thing that we see when you talk about community is a lot of times companies have these ERG groups or affinity groups and they assemble and there's really nothing driving it, and so then you have this mismatch with expectations and what a company can actually deliver. But when you convene like that, you're convening around a common either mission, focus, etc., and the connectivity is actually more powerful. So it's like 1 + 1 = 10, as opposed to getting in a full group and everything is great when it's really not.
Yeah.
So you're convening and connecting in a more powerful way.
I think that with kids it's interesting because there's double sides to using technology, of course. So a lot of so I was talking about an online peer community. So we have this service called gem.com, which is an online community of kids where kids can learn new courses, they can upload projects, they can share, and then they can talk to each other and they can comment on each other. It's very, very powerful. A lot of times kids that are introverted or that are really reserved or sometimes not performing well in school end up taking leadership positions and they end up mentoring other kids. So it really works. At the same time, there's a lot of stigma around social media, and there's a lot of parents that say they don't want their kids involved in social media, and so they end up throwing the good with the bad. So they basically say they don't want their kids to be uploading anything, commenting or talking to anybody, or the companies or parents take COPPA compliance to the nth degree, and so you're preventing some of the benefits of technology, and then a kid is only able to interact with kids that are around them in school, and sometimes there aren't kids that are interested in what you're interested in around you, and so you end up being the lone kid in school that doesn't have kids that are interested, peers like you that are interested in STEM or robotics or coding, and then you perpetuate the cycle. So it's I find I'm a technologist, I'm an engineer myself. I was in classes where I was less than 10% of the class was women, and it makes a big difference to not see people around you in the classroom doing what you're doing. And so if we can leverage technology to do that online, if it's not happening in physical space, we absolutely have to do that. But I think that we have to have a little more nuance in the conversation around use of tech, and not just say iPad's bad, social media bad, wooden blocks good. You kind of have to. You have to have a little more nuance.
Sorry.
No, I completely agree with you, because I think one of the biggest things that we've seen is that a lot of people that are designing with our medium, so virtual reality, explain VR as being their what. And a lot of times it's VR is your how, it's not your what, right? So VR is an enabler, but it's not your what. And so it's really designing products in ways that people understand, and really understanding what your end user and your market is looking for, and not just using the technology to use the technology. And so a lot of times that comes down to position and framing, and I think that there's a lot of stigma around the technology and just kind of a lack of general education, because people will still come to me and say, doesn't the technology, like we were invited to speak at a huge conference, and they asked us to bring demos. And he was like, do you need the computers, right? Do you need like all of the wires and sensors? And I was like, no, we operate on standalone headsets. And a lot of people don't even recognize or realize that there are literally $300 standalone headsets in the market that don't require a phone, don't require a computer. And so I think it really comes down to framing, positioning, and education for emerging technology, which is based upon the fundamental of understanding your market.
I have a great example of this at Syndio. So we work for a lot of large companies. One very large company, a conglomerate. They had done their pay equity review in the past. It took them months to do it. And we had worked with them to get their pay equity review for this one cycle. And they had leadership coming out. I flew out to help present to their leadership on the pay equity review that we had completed for them. Morning of, I show up at 9 a.m. and the meeting's set for 11:30 with their general counsel, with their C-suite, CFO, CEO. And the person who's doing the pay equity is very, very upset because she made a bunch of changes to the data, to the groupings of how you group to compare people, moved people around, updated the data in our software, and she said, well, what are we going to do? Like, this is at 9 a.m., the meeting's at 11:30, what should we do? We have old data, old everything. I said, don't worry. We re-uploaded the new data set with all the changes to the software, outputted everything, generated our tool auto-generated a complete PowerPoint presentation with lots of details that auto-generated. So we went from, and we tweaked it a little bit and presented it to leadership. Flawlessly, everyone was thrilled with brand new data. So we basically set like a land speed record for pay equity review for a giant conglomerate, going from 0, brand new data, to a complete PowerPoint output that was presented to this C-suite of this giant company in roughly 70 minutes. Which, like, without the technology, forget it. If you asked me as like a labor economist or statistician to do that without the tech, I would have said, nope, sorry, can't be done. Nope, sorry, forget it. We're just going to tell them, sorry, we don't have any results yet. So technology is really powerful and transformative. The problem is that people aren't aware of it. I think you're right. I think everyone else is right. Like, it's a hard sell sometimes because people are used to a status quo. They don't get that things exist in the market, or they're just wed to a model because it's what they're used to, and they don't know that you can use these things to their advantage.
So, across the PK to gray spectrum, the skill development is extremely important, but so is the EQ and that emotional intelligence. And we have research that in the C-suite, female CEOs have a very different profile than male CEOs, but they also have a very different profile than women in middle management roles. So in your companies, how are you thinking about that EQ piece? How do you prioritize? People can't be excellent at everything. So how are you prioritizing some of the softer skills over others that you're integrating into what you're delivering?
So on our side, we recently, actually this is a recent thing that I'm really happy that we did. We used to have a set of team values that were internal, and then we used to have a set of brand and company values that were external. And the brand and company values were what we were trying to inspire kids to be. We're inspiring kids to be problem solvers. We want to inspire them to be not afraid of failure. We want to inspire them to be creative. And then internally, we had these kind of internal values that were more around performance or helping each other and things like that. We ended up merging these. And so now what we are trying to espouse in the kids that we're trying to serve is what we are trying to be for ourselves. And what happens is you end up really having a very complete view of what a team looks like. Not a perfect person, because there aren't any, but what a team looks like. And so it's things like being confident, being creative, being humble, not being afraid to ask when you don't know something, being inclusive and promoting of diversity, being a problem solver, and also, I think I said it, not being afraid to fail. We didn't go back and do kind of the analysis of how different team members fit, but I would hypothesize that certain genders do better in certain ones than others, and then some people that didn't think they had a skill end up kind of really having a skill. And so it's little tools like that I think is important. It's why, investing in a logical idea with some technology ends up kind of really bringing the magic of both together. And we'll see how it goes, but so far so good.
We started with anti-sexual harassment training just because it's something that is so important to get right, but it's also something that's really heavily rooted in perception and in empathy and in understanding. And those are things that are really, really difficult to communicate on paper. And so that was just something that was a beauty of the medium we design with. But where we're going next is action and conscious bias training, inclusive leadership training, negotiation skills for women, etc. So again, things that are really heavily oriented around perception, around your ability to empathize, around your ability to be aware, and the nuances in that ability. And obviously, we're going to see that play out in different ways for men and for women, because that's just the nature of these skills.
It should come as no surprise that sales is very EQ driven, and we spend a lot of time thinking about how do you actually teach EQ. there's a stigma around sales as a profession in terms of just like this Don Draper-like extroverted, you know, sleek suit sort of thing. That's one end of the spectrum. The other is just like your used car salesman. But sales has changed, and sort of the asymmetry of information has changed. And now as a buyer, you can go out and access all the information you need on 10 different kinds of SaaS tools. And so there are two things that are changing. One, culturally, right? How do you communicate sales? And a lot of the job descriptions for sales roles have a lot of unconscious bias just in how they're written, in terms of crushing quota, in terms of just all the aggressive kind of language that it can be a turnoff to people from non-traditional and underrepresented backgrounds. And so at FlockJ, we spend a lot of time sort of thinking about how do you teach mirror and matching and active listening. And it turns out the data lines up where the most effective salespeople today are actually not the extroverts, they're the ambiverts. They're the people who are as much introverts as they are extroverts. And so they're spending 20% of the time on the sales call speaking, and 80% of it listening and asking questions. And so those are actual skills you can measure now with technology and teach too. And it's reflective of where we're going as an industry in tech in terms of how we conduct tech sales.
Being able to get the job done is just the basic calling card. There are a lot of people that work really hard, hard in the sports analogy, put lots of points on the board, but they're not moving forward. And so it is about navigation. We talk a lot about personal brand, which we know accounts for 30% of your success, and most of us don't know it. You know, in a startup, either in our company or others, lots of people can do the basics, but do you know how to take risks without being risky? Do you know how to read a room and navigate? All of those things will determine the success. And then how do you become a sponsor magnet, as we say? It's not about having a mentor per se, it's about who's talking about you behind closed doors. And that's all EQ.
And you know, all of you up here have companies that are very, very connected to the mission. And aside from revenue goals, growth goals, on the social impact side, what kind of KPIs are you looking at, or have you put in place to measure your impact? Do you, or is it just so ingrained in what you do? How do you think about that?
So actually, one thing that was really interesting at Syndio, we had a team meeting, all hands meeting, where we asked our employees, like, how do you want us to measure success? What are the internal measures of success? And aside from thinking of everything on the group level instead of the individual level, we also thought of the collectively of the goal of measuring based on how many people we've helped, like how many lives we've changed, because often the output of what we're doing is actual pay being changed. So someone is underpaid, identified by our model, and they get more money. So they're actually human beings whose lives are directly impacted in a really meaningful way in some instances. And it was cool to see that our whole team kind of rallied around the idea of one of the group measures by which we internally measure success is how many lives we can directly impact financially.
That's really cool. At FlockJ, we're similarly designed where we only make money when people get jobs. So by economic design, our KPI is an outcome, it's a life change. It's sort of like, we're not going to get paid if you go through our training and don't get hired. So we've tried to align every incentive within the company to be around that kind of impact.
That's cool.
I think you're exactly right. If your business model is disconnected from your mission, then the mission is over here as opposed to it being put together. For us, we look at things like engagement and promotion, but we also look at qual metrics. And someone said about 2 weeks ago, Lisa, Landa gives help and hope. And I'm like, what's that mean? And it's like, if you don't believe it's possible, if you don't have the tools, then you're not open to the resources in front of you. So we look at the stories and the enablement in addition to engagement, promotion, retention, globally.
We measure, there's slightly harder to measure, but how many kids' lives we impacted, how many kids have become inventors and creators. So it's a little difficult to measure, but we get through it through either the school or the districts or through the parents. But also for the past 6 years, we've been measuring how many girls we have in our inventor community. And right now, our latest numbers are about 38%, which is about almost 4 times the industry average. And now we're going to measure how long we can keep them in the community, so that we can make sure that it's not just a one and done deal, that they're sort of engaged throughout. So that's the biggest measure of this initiative that I mentioned before, Snap the Gap, is to start with install base and then measure over a year to see if we can really impact their views on STEM.
We look at a variety of different KPIs. So we look at attitudinal and behavioral change. One of the things that we look at is self-ranked versus displayed. So how do people perceive that they would respond versus how are they actually responding? What kind of hesitancy are they showing? What kind of confidence are they showing? But then we're actually also, we aggregate that out for companies, but we give users individual feedback. So one thing that's really important to us is that we're actually providing an opportunity for people to learn, and we're not just saying, hey, you potentially have red flags, you potentially have red flags, but we're actually saying, here are some core areas where you can do better. So we actually give personalized feedback to users. It's user specific, nobody else sees it. But we're actually also looking at, in addition to that, kind of the longitudinal impact, right? So as you're going through training through different, areas that are gray versus black and white, et cetera, different situations, scenarios, but also year over year, how is what you're learning actually applying to these different concepts, and are you actually growing in that way?
And whether it's a K-12 district or corporation, where are the end users, the schools, the employers in the conversation? And as tech startups, how do you get, I'm sure you get all sorts of requests for any number of things. How do you stay true to focus on your core, but also being nimble to customer feedback?
That's hard.
That's the name of the game, yeah.
I hope you guys can tell me how to do it. That's already hard.
It's a full-time job,
That's a real challenge, right? It's really hard to do that, especially when I think all of us are doing things that are innovative. I always think of it as like the difference between if you ask your, the old Henry Ford quote, if you ask your customers what they want, they say faster horses. So a lot of us on this stage are building cars in a model that's antiquated and old and used to horse and buggies. So, this is definitely true for Syndio, and I think true for others on the panel. But that's hard because you have to balance like customer requests for things that are really in the line of like faster horses, which is part of an antiquated model, versus like trying to, I think the real goal is to identify the problems and then, use that feedback to identify problems and then develop, with our own creativity, solutions that are more kind of not so much customer driven, but less feedback driven and more kind of, that's where we add a lot of value, is like coming up with creative technological solutions to the problems we identify.
So my view on this might be atypical. I think that one of the biggest benefits you have as a startup is being able to move quickly to build things that your customers ask for, right? And to actually be able to put products into the market that fulfill needs. And so I think the way that I think about that is we have a really strong mission, right? And our mission never changes. But if we have a variety of different customers that come to us and say, here's an area that we're really looking at and we think it'd be really beneficial, that's something we're going to consider. Because that's, I think that that's our job, is to be able to build products for customer needs, and not necessarily change our entire product roadmap, but maybe we'll devote 25% of our dev time to a set of features that are most commonly requested from customers, and then we'll plan out the rest of our product roadmap accordingly.
I think that's a really good point. Something we think a lot about is sort of like first principle pain points, and differentiating those first principle pain points versus feature requests and trying to strike a balance. Because to your point, sometimes there's a lot of intake around here's what I think I really need. But really you're trying to solve a foundational problem of like measurement or design or whatever it is. For FlockJ, there isn't really a sales degree out there. And so if you're trying to hire a good salesperson, most hiring managers don't really know what that looks like. And what that looks like to them is sort of past examples of success in their organization, which are a product of a lot of different kinds of compounding biases and things in the past. So there's a bit of an educational process that we sort of go through where it's like, what really are you solving for? What is the credential we can provide to you? And then we work that into our process.
For us, it's what you do and how you do it. And so we have non-negotiables. Forget bright red lines. There are walls we don't cross. So things like we don't share individual information because we can't be the most trusted if we do that. We will bend and flex on our product, but we never break it up. So it's almost like you have to begin with the end in mind and stay true to what makes you unique, but you slowly have to flex, fail, which we do on a daily, in order to meet that mission. But if you're not rooted in something, you're going to get whipsawed, especially when you're a small company calling on humongous organizations. You have to be rooted in the things that you won't compromise on.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think you need to build that into your policies too,
That's right.
right? Because, for example, we've had companies say, okay, you can aggregate the data, so what's the minimum number of users we can aggregate it with? And so it's really thinking proactively about ways that you can incorporate your mission and your values into your policies, but still be able to have some level of flexibility, so.
Great. Well, we're at our 1 minute mark, and it might be too tight to do this, but I wanted to give panelists the opportunity to have a final word on equity and empowerment.
Snapthegap.org.
I think it's cool that this panel spans the gamut, right? Because I think it's great that there's like, K through 12 focus at all levels, because the pipeline is a problem for sure. And then we see it like at all levels of career, like someone getting into the market, someone already in the market, someone already in a job, like someone, So to me, I think it's great that there is so much focus, that really spans the gamut here. Although I still think, and I'm curious to what other panels think, it's really hard to get, startups are small, we have limited marketing budget, maybe you guys have bigger budgets than we do, but I think the challenge I always see is like getting the word out. Like I routinely hear people say, oh, there's no solution that can do pay equity, so we can do, that's the problem I see, is like getting the word out in a more cost-effective way, let's put it that way. I don't know if others have thoughts.
It's all about personalization. Whether it's children, millennials, those of us on Act 5, 10, or even 15, it's all about meeting people where they are and giving them what they need. Do that.
Mine is that it's really hard to explain a feeling. So that's the example I always go back to. I can't explain what it feels to feel hot, or to feel cold, or to feel love, or to feel sad. And so it's equally as difficult to explain what it feels like to be the elephant in the room, or to be the only woman in the room, or to feel like the receiving end of a microaggression when nobody else has felt what it feels like to feel a microaggression. So it's all about feeling.
And then the work we're doing in the board and in the C-suite is really changing what people think of as that CEO. So we know most boards are doing the hiring, and a lot of times they have this perception of what that straw man looks like. And we've got data that says diverse teams have a stronger impact on shareholder return. We have data on female CEO performance. So we're working to change what that looks like and have conversations at that level. Well, thank you all for participating. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you this evening.